You know what? I just realized that basically every time I start one of my intros, I'm always like, "Welcome back to Arena and Tabletop Simulator," but I don't even really have like a channel name. Just pulling things together here. But anyway, tonight we're gonna do something a little bit different than what we've been previously doing. So it'll definitely be a shorter stream. So I'm going to talk about update number 43 from the Tenaris Adventures Kickstarter. So this is the one that just came out this last week. So there's some interesting details in there. And then after that, we're going to do a what I call like a class spotlight on one of the classes from Arena the Contest, and we'll talk about each of the characters and the class in whole, and go over some things. And got Code here to give me his feedback as well as the guy who's just here.
Just hanging out.
He's the guy that's here. All right. So anyway, from update 43, it's kind of interesting one because it talked about the Tenaris RPG game, book game, D&D type thing, and I guess they're calling it the source book. And then talked about the boss versus boss mode, and they only talked partly about it. So I'm pretty sure that's why they just labeled it Part One, because they didn't really go into a lot of detail about it, but giving us a little bit more view about what's going to be happening. So basically, from the production timeline, there's not really any updates. All things are going ahead, and for people that didn't already know, the first wave and the second wave are delayed by approximately 3 months after the original dates. So pretty much just take the dates that you see on the Kickstarter and push it back three months, and hopefully that should be about the time that we'll get it. But otherwise, that's about it on that terms. And then we got the RPG campaign. So this is for the source book for D&D. It include 3 different books. One's the source book, which is giving you like the lore and background. You get the Emperor's character dossiers, which is basically your character creation for D&D characters. So there's 4 unique classes that are mentioned in the art and it's called like the World and Art book, I believe. And so in the version 2 that came out a couple months back, you can look in there and they basically just give the names. I don't think they even give any details on what they do, but um, so anyway, that's that book, and then the Realms of Madness, which sounds like it's actually your adventure part of the book, and it says that it connects with the board game, which is kind of interesting, right? I mean, I'm assuming that means just like lore-wise, it's connecting to the board game, but I don't know if they have something else with that. What do you think, Code?
I think you're right on that. I think doesn't say it works with the board game; it just connects with it. So
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. Basically, they're trying to just let people know that it's a completely separate team that's doing this RPG book. So, if they have any delays or something's happening with either project, doesn't necessarily mean that the other one's going to be delayed. But they did mention, which was kind of a bit of shocker to some of us, was they were talking about releasing this campaign in October here, this month. We're now into October, and it didn't happen. They've moved it back to 2021, the first quarter, and there's pros and cons. Obviously, like as a business, you know, basically they're talking about a year between each of their campaigns, um, which you know not a bad idea, but at the same time, it's like they're a small developer, so I'm sure they'd like a more consistent stream of money coming in, than waiting one time a year. And then also part of their reasoning was that uh, basically, and this makes sense because I've seen plenty of other game developers do this, where they release a game and then they say, or a Kickstarter, and they say, okay, we're gonna, be shipping out product at the beginning of the year or something, and then something happens and it gets delayed, and then they decide to start releasing all these other Kickstarters, right? And you're kind of like, oh, they're talking about that all the time. You see it on their posts, on their websites and stuff here or there, and it's like, I mean, man, come on, I paid for this other game here, and it's supposed to have been done, and now the other one's delayed. Like, feel a little bit kind of ripped off, right? That if it, even though it's not always necessarily true, you feel like that the developer isn't putting in the amount of work that they should to get it there on time, right? But I think it was smart for them to move it back so that way the team didn't appear like they're just moving on from Tenaris Adventures and already just thinking about the RPG book. But I mean, they're going to have plenty of challenges, I think, trying to get this whole campaign, this new campaign done, and the previous one at the same time, because the current plan is still to ship this source book with your Wave 2 items for Tenaris Adventures, which still seems really risky to me, especially moving the Kickstarter back because they got so much input from this last campaign that um, that they ended up changing a lot of the design, I think, of the book. Like, for instance, they were going to have essentially like stickers or punch boards, kind of like I think Pandemic Legacy has that, and basically consumable items for playing your campaign in Tenaris Adventures, and people like really complained about that, and so they decided to not do that and change that. So I'm kind of wondering what else, essentially could happen similar, um, if they wait too long on this source book and people are changing. Now, obviously it's a little different because it's just like a book, right? I mean, I haven't ever backed any D&D source books previously because I've never actually played D&D, so it's not really been up my alley. So I don't know. Have you checked into any of those before, Code?
I played D&D once, and I know there's a lot of stuff in those books, and I mean they're expensive because you got to buy. Kind of like how this is. There's like multiple books, so you got to buy just for the base game. I think is 3 books as well. So
Yeah,
don't quote me on that. But when I played it, that's what I remember. There was a bunch of books that we had to use, and I was like, "What am I doing?"
yeah. Well, and see, that's the thing too is people may not realize, and if anyone remembers from my stream back in what was it, July now with Alex, and we were talking about this book, and he said, well, oh, you still have to have, the D&D starter book and the class book and, all the starter stuff or whatever to play D&D. Um, so if you don't already have those, obviously you're going to have to either they're hopefully going to offer it through their campaign or you're going to have to get it on your own.
Yeah.
So, right there, you're kind of talking about even additional costs just for these items to play this. So we'll see as we get more, but sounds like it's pushed back to the beginning of 2021. And then along with some other news which we didn't know about is that they were going to include a villains pack, and then I think below, even in the comments, let me see if I can find it. Um, Alex made a comment about that there will be, yeah, a villains pack and a NPCs for Tenaris Adventures pack of miniatures. So the pictures you see here, you got Cordall, which is obviously the bad guy from the first mission, Lava Citadel, and then Count Gazzini from the second one, which is the one we played last week. And I mean, I really like. I mean, Cordall is pretty freaking awesome. Um, I mean, he looks beefy. I mean, look
Big
how
beam.
big his boot is. Like, oh my
Huge.
God, crush a whole person just with that boot. But then you got Gazzini here with I try to say in the epic voice guy's voice of Abs. So he's pretty awesome. I mean, it'd be cool to have these guys on there, on your board, of course. But obviously they don't really provide much else other than just being like, oh, it's super awesome looking. Now, if you're, kind of into miniature games, you're probably already at that point, right? I mean, you can essentially replace all of your miniatures with whatever you wanted, and it's the same kind of thing as long as you remember, right? So you're already kind of in it for the awesome miniatures. So anyway, we'll find out more about that in the future. Moving on, we got the boss versus boss mode, which this is actually an item I specifically asked Alex to address, which they did for this update, because previously it was always called Dragon versus Dragon. But when I spoke to them about what changes that they were doing, they talked about, oh, we're going to include other bosses are going to be able to be used besides dragons, like the Balroth miniature or the Arachna Queen miniature or the Chimera, I believe, are some of the other miniatures that they're going to be able to play in the Dragon versus Dragon mode. I'm sorry, boss versus boss mode. And so, because specifically of that reason, then it's like, oh, well, they're not dragons, so it's really bosses then. So they decided to rename it to boss versus boss. So the interesting part of this mode is it's going to be like a MOBA type thing where your victory condition is killing the opposing boss. And apparently, it sounds like there's a couple ways to achieve this. You're either using these blasting charges that you collect to use, I guess it says when you use 4 charges, you get an ultimate blast attack, which deals up to 70 damage on the enemy boss. And then apparently it sounds like there's a whole miss system, kind of like the rest of the game, where you can miss your blast, your ultimate blast attack, I guess, and still do damage. But you got that, and then you got the minions who'll be moving across the board, and you have to stop them. Otherwise, apparently they do a lot of damage to the boss. So that'll be pretty interesting. They also have what's that? The magical central zone. Sounds easy, but being there means you are not in the enemy lair and that you're exposed to attacks, including the powerful battlefield attack, which the boss can only do if there are no enemies in its lair. Others require good teamwork and well calculated turns, like triggers, for example. If your boss is Asmore the Red Dragon, you'll kill an enemy hero on a lava tile. So it kind of makes me wonder, though, if they're basically only going to have one map, or if there's going to be multiple maps that are, that they're planning already for this. Might be something to talk to Alex about at some point, but um, sounds like there'll be pretty interesting stuff. You're going to get different cards for your bosses, which is pretty awesome. So it's not just going to be the same ones that you already have. And looks like it'll be pretty interesting. I mean, I really, obviously we didn't get a huge detail on everything in here. And actually, so it's funny. Quick note here at the end, they talk about this thing called the Cecil Cup, and Alex actually mentioned it to me at one point when he was kind of giving me an update on things, and I was like, wait, you guys did what? Apparently, they just decided to do like an internal tournament type thing to play this mode, and they decided to name it after the prisoner from Lava Citadel. So he's the third prisoner if you're able to successfully save all 3 heroes, which is actually pretty challenging to do. Um, that is Cecil, and apparently they decided to name it after him. So anyway, yeah, hopefully we'll get some more updates on that, the boss versus boss mode on the next update, and then hopefully we'll be able to play it soon too. I mean, from this update and what Alex has told me is they, getting pretty close to it being done, but no word yet on when we'll be able to see it. Just that he says we'll send it to you when it's done. So anyway, let me change modes here. We got, where is it? Where's my tabletop simulator here? Um, Hold on for a second. For some reason it blacked out. Screen blacked out on tabletop simulator for some reason. It's Oh wait, no. Here it is. Okay. All right. So anyway, so that was the first item. The second item that I wanted to go over was the this hero spotlight, spotlight that I was referring to. So tonight we'll go over the brute class, which is the melee DPS guys of Arena of the Contest and Tanera's Adventures. There's going to be some new guys added eventually to once Tanera's Adventures shows up, but basically this is what we'll go over tonight, and that'll be pretty much about it. So the brute class consists of these four heroes here. By the way, this is a document that is on the Dropbox. If you want to get this, you can go download it off the Dropbox and print it out yourself if you want. It hasn't been included in any printouts, so you won't find it in your core box. You won't find it probably. I bet you won't even find it in the Tenaris Adventure stuff or anything like that when this comes out. Dragori made this just to kind of like give people an idea of the different heroes and classes and what they do, um, which is actually pretty helpful, especially for people that have never ever played this game before. I actually kind of suggest this, but there's still some areas I think that could be improved with this to make it even more usable. So anyway, we'll go into the first page here, which is the brutes. We got Count Blake, the vampire, Morlogh. I don't even know how do you think you say his name?
Morlogh?
Is it, yeah? You think that's what it is? Morlogh the Minotaur?
Yeah.
That's what we're gonna go with. We got Katar the barbarian and Sedrik the werewolf. And then they got a little thing down here, which I still kind of find some of these funny that they have these little. It's so cheesy in my opinion. I just feel like I'm just taking a big bite of cheese every time I read one of these things. Prepare for a quick death. Nothing can stand against my mighty strength. It's just, yeah. Anyway, we'll start off with the first one here. So actually, before we do that, let's talk about stats and passives. So all brutes, and this is the same for any other class in this game. All these heroes that are in this class will have the same stats. So brutes all have 65 health, basic attack at 8, 6 defense, 6 movement, and they all have this passive called brutality. The trigger is hitting a target that isn't adjacent to any of your allies on the first hit of your turn, and the effect will be that the target takes 4 additional damage, or 4 damage. It's basically 4 additional damage, but they write it as 4 damage. So they'll all have this. Basically, what this means is your brutes are best being pretty much either the first person to go into a fight or the hero or class person that you're going to use to basically be on their own to fight someone by themselves without having anyone else at their back, pretty much. Because brutality relies on the fact that they're not adjacent to any of your allies, obviously it puts you in a vulnerable position. but brutes do so much damage that they can hold out actually pretty well. I mean, obviously they don't have a lot of defense, but the idea is that they're going to pound through somebody, fast enough that they can hold their own, and maybe they get some, either range support or or like a healer or somebody to kind of give them a little health. So starting with Katar, the barbarian. So in here it says he's efficient brute at dealing damage because he can make attacks that are more likely to hit the enemy. Ideal for those who want to deal large amounts of damage and not worry about complex strategies. And then it just lists his attacks. So this area down here, this is specifically that part I was referring to, where it would be nice if they did one more page right before the first page in this brute page, where it explained a little bit more about what they intended for this stats listing, because these stats here aren't actually, they don't mean anything. It's all subjective measurement criteria to give players an idea of what this hero is good at, without somebody reading through every single card, or without somebody having to understand all the complexities of this class, or of this hero. Sorry. So offense maxed out. He basically does a ton of damage, and he's, obviously one of the higher damage characters, if they're putting this basically. And then his defense is pretty low, as you'll see. We'll talk about this, how his abilities correspond with these ideas here. His mobility is kind of medium, a little bit on the higher end, which basically means how his abilities affect him being able to move around. Um, defense. So defense is, I guess I should have started at the top. So offense is pretty much what you think it is. His abilities do basically just more damage, and give you an idea of how much it is. Defense, pretty much what you think of it. How much his abilities will be defensive, like if it's providing some kind of, like, like for instance, we'll see in other spotlights about heroes that give, like protection will have higher defense. Mobility is how much he can move around the battlefield with his abilities. Um, and then effects are specifically related to condition effects. So, like these ones here, conditions, and like additional effect items that may not even be covered exactly on the conditions. And then handling just basically means how easy is it for somebody to play this character. If it's all the way full, like it is for Katar, then that means he's a really, like, what I would consider an easy character. He doesn't require a lot of, experience or background knowledge to know. You can just kind of grab him, play him, and you'll have a good time, and you'll do just as well as pretty much any other player, because you don't really need to understand him that well to play him. So looking at his abilities, we got stuff like Mighty Blow. So that is the one that gives you a bonus to your roll. If you decide to use that bonus, so there's kind of a trade-off. If you use the bonus, then your damage will be lessened by 2. So instead of doing 14 damage, you'll do 12 damage. Which, even, 12 damage is pretty freaking decent, but 14 damage is really good, especially if you're talking about putting yourself in a position of, like I said earlier, getting into the battle early, being by yourself, getting brutality. You're going to do 18 damage by yourself right at the beginning. And, let's say you even have somebody else that, is putting on, like, vulnerable to an enemy, which will increase your damage even more. So then you'll be doing, the 17 plus 4 more, so you'll be doing 21 damage. And that's basically a special attack by yourself, and it's a primary ability. So So, yep, just massive damage, but increases your chance, which makes it a lot easier to play this guy, especially when you are knowing, like, hey, I really need to make this strike, so I'm just going to take the minus damage because I don't need to max it out. You know, especially if you're trying to do like a killing blow on somebody, this is great for that. And then we got Berserker Strike. You may move the target up to 2 squares. The target is exposed, ends if used, and it's 13 damage. So 13 damage, definitely very good. Like I said earlier, pairing with Brutality will do a lot. And then of course, so with his effects, being able to move somebody 2 squares is actually really good. Which if you guys seen other streams, it's super easy to throw somebody into lava or spikes, or basically throwing them into a bad position just with that ability. And to top it off, expose, which reduces their defense by 3, will set basically you can hit him, and then basically you can pass him potentially to one of your other teammates, and then that teammate can make their attack with an increased chance to hit. So that's a really good, and especially for the damage. So that's, I think, um, that's a little bit on the mobility side. I think that they're kind of tacking this too. And then you'll see another one here in a second. We got Barbaric Rage, which is a range 2 ability. This one is another one where just you gain a bonus of 2 to your roll, so you don't even have to gamble at all. You just get it. And you do 26 damage. So, of course, like I said earlier, pair it together, 30 damage, 1 hit. That's a massive, massive hit. Um, you can really only get better with only a few other abilities that kind of let you attack multiple targets, and obviously that's assuming that you're hitting all of those targets. And then we have Whirlwind. So your benefit is that you may move up to 5 squares. Meanwhile, you may strike each target at any time, and it's 18 damage per hit, hitting up to 2 enemies. So um, this is one for sure that's all about the mobility, right? So you can do your 6 movement, and then you can make your additional 5 movement to be able to attack 2 different enemies and just hit them really hard. Um, you're gonna do 36 damage, actually 40 damage. Assuming that you're putting yourself in a good spot for brutality. So that's just massive, and that's definitely why he's completely full offense, um, handling super easy because you're just doing stupid amounts of damage. Obviously there was only one ability that gave him an effect, which is exposed. But that's it. And then the mobility of being able to move around. So this is vital, being able to. And we've done it before in past ones where maybe you want to get out of a bad spot, right? So normally when you make your attack, your movement ends, right? You do attack, and then you can move, or you move and then you attack, but you can't alternate. Well, with Whirlwind, you can. So you can move up, you can do an attack, you can move on to maybe attack a different target, and then move away from him all at the same time. So it's pretty strong ability. So anyway, that's wrapping up Katar. Definitely very straightforward character. People often say he's kind of boring because he is so straightforward, but uh, I like him. I mean, he's pretty dependable hero. What do you think, Code?
Character probably if you're just starting out. He's pretty straightforward, but he does a lot of damage, and he can move around, so and move people around. So a lot of levels in the core have a lot of lava.
Yep,
So
definitely a good training hero, I'd
right,
say, because he can. essentially set himself up into good spots to do more damage, and even set up enemies more for you to be able to for your allies, like your other heroes on your team, to be able to do damage too.
Absolutely.
All right, so moving on, we got Sedrik the werewolf. So looking at him, max damage, of course, again. His defense is exactly the same. Mobility is one lower. His effects are two higher. And then his handling is one notch down, which I feel is pretty accurate for this hero. So we'll look over the abilities. So Moonlight Rage, 11 damage. The target. So I guess one thing we should talk about in general with Sedrik is his main ability, which we'll see over and over here, is once he's below 35 health, at 35 or lower, he does way more damage. He is the I guess what would you call it? Like the berserker almost of some other games, right? Where the more damage he's taking, the more damage he's putting out, and that's very much Sedrik. So he really specializes once he gets low, but then at the same time, because he is a brute, he's 6 defense is pretty low, and he doesn't have a lot of defense abilities that you got to be able to keep him alive so he can keep doing it. So I think we had a stream a couple what 2 3 times ago of somebody playing Sedrik, and he got he did I think he did one of his special attacks, and then he died, but then he was able to be resurrected and brought back into the game, and because you usually don't resurrect with that much health, that he's already in that critical zone again, so he's able to just start dealing out massive damage again. So with Moonlight Rage, the 11 damage targets expose. Of course, that's good again, setting up for your teammates. And then, like I said, if you have 35 or fewer HP, the target takes 7 additional damage, that's just freaking nasty, man. 18 damage base. That's your primary if you're below the health threshold, and then plus 4 more, so you got 22 for that attack. That's crazy strong. Then we got Death Claws. So this is the one that's kind of like your, uh, I guess, I don't know, almost like a whirlwind type thing, where if you have fewer than, you're in the health threshold area again, you may target 2 enemies instead of one. So, and at a range too, that can be pretty good because you don't have to be completely, right in the action on top of somebody. You could be a little further back and hit 2 different guys and hopefully be able to still trigger your brutality as well, especially if you position yourself right. So then you're getting 24 base, 28 with passive. So that's a huge hit. 28 damage for a primary attack that, like I said, that's right back into special territory. Bestial Fury, one target, but you get to strike the target twice. So in Death Claws, you are able to only attack, essentially, you have to attack 2 different targets. You can't attack the same guy twice. In this one, you have range 1, but you get to attack that person twice. So you get to do 12 damage twice. So you're doing 24. And then it says if you then also you get to have 12 additional damage if you're below the health threshold again. So then you're actually doing 36 damage plus the brutality. So you're gonna be at 40 damage right there on one guy. And basically that's over half health of a tank. It's nasty. And then Bloodthirsty. So 24 damage base, and then you get a permanent while you have when you're in the health threshold area. Your strikes are criticals on 17 or more. So there's another brute that has something similar to this, but basically being able to have this on all the time is really good, but obviously you then have to be within that health threshold area, which is a little more challenging. So this is the reason why they gave you slightly more on the effects. You still have the exposed like Katar did, but you also get this permanent effect for yourself, which is pretty nice. And then I think the other reason they kind of give them a little bit more on effects and lower on handling is because of essentially that health threshold. So there's certain conditions you have to meet for that additional damage. So Sedrik, as you can tell, easily probably the highest damage, uh, at least brute, probably one of the highest damage characters in the game if he's within that health threshold area. Um, but if he's not, then he's not. He's doing all right, but he's not topping any damage charts. Completely on his own, and he doesn't have a lot of other abilities to support allies or anything other than Moonlight Rage, which is exposed is definitely very good, but with Katar you're able to move somebody, which is even better. All right, we got next. We got the Minotaur. So you probably have heard from my past videos that the Minotaur here is actually like my favorite brute, and that's mostly because I think it's just unique with just crazy amount of movement and which is so vital in this game and doing a lot of damage when he does those things. So we got the Minotaur here, max health, which or max damage. I think all of them except for the next one have. Defense is even lower, which I think I think the only reason they attribute to this one is reckless blow.
Mm,
Is why they give him a lower defense. But anyway, and then mobility, he's just below the top, which I think is pretty good to say because um, his abilities are gonna give all. I think all of them except for one is gonna give him movement. And then effects, we'll kind of get to that. He's the same as Sedrik. And handling is a little bit lower. I almost feel like you could almost classify this guy's handling even a little bit lower than what they do, because they gave him, yeah, even one less handling than Sedrik. But I think he can be even harder than that sometimes just to make sure you're putting him in the right spots. Hold on for a second. Did you want to make any comments about Sedrik for a second?
um, I mean, you touched on every good point about Cedric, so I think we're good with him.
All right. I'll do some final thoughts on the class in general and kind of how some of these guys mix with some of the other heroes out there. So, and we got the Minotaur. So he's got in bull charge, he has a benefit to be able to move 4 squares in a single direction before declaring the target. And he does 11 damage, which is pretty decent. And then the target will take 4 additional damage if he used the benefit to move the 4 squares. So what's crazy about this is you can use your 6 movement, then you can use 4 additional movement. So you're doing 10 movement in a single ability. And sometimes people don't know this. Let's say you're like all the way on the other side of the map, but you need to get to the other side as quickly as possible, but you can't actually get to a certain target. Um, Now this doesn't happen a lot because oftentimes people will just um, they'll decide to use a second movement, but it's kind of it's in the nitty gritty of the details. So a benefit makes you basically immune to reaction attacks. You won't incite reaction attacks. So the idea is you could move 10 squares. You move the first six, and then the last four, let's say you got like enemies lined up, you can move right past them and not incite any reaction attacks, which can be really good, potentially if you want to get into a good spot, or maybe a future turn or something like that. Instead of trying to use essentially a second movement to get somewhere, but taking those reaction attacks. And then, so obviously you have to make all the four movement, which can be a little bit difficult, but this was one of those items that personally I believe that the idea for it was here. Let me pull him. So if he's doing his four movement against, let me just grab somebody here. I'm gonna grab the Emperor. So he does his four movement, one, two, three, four. That he would have to attack somebody right here to be able to essentially score that, right? Because he's charging, right? You've seen a bull charge probably before. Doesn't really make sense to say, you know, one, two, three, four, and then he attacks the guy to the side of him. Well, I was wrong. Apparently, this counts just as well. So as long as you're doing that, you're ending there and you're adjacent, you can make your attack and you can get your 4 damage. Which so it's actually good for him because it makes it a lot easier to be able to make that attack. So really great ability there. Um, so yeah, 15 damage, a little bit lower than the other guys, but getting that movement can be vital. Okay, Reckless Blow. So this is the one that I believe where they knocked him down on damage because he actually has to take 3 damage before he can make this attack. And when he does, he'll do 16 damage, which I think is the hardest hit primary attack without any kind of effect. It's just straight 16. I think is the highest out of any character. I'd have to double check that, but I think that is correct. And then the effect is on a critical hit, the target takes 10 additional damage instead of 5. Um, so obviously getting a crit can be pretty hard unless, I was going to say this for later, but I'm just going to throw it out now. If you look at Jade, she has an ability right here called Angelic Voice, or primary ability. The number 2 effect is an ally within range is hastened, and its primary attacks uh, its primary attack strikes are critical hits on rolls of 17 or more. So they pair excellent together because, for one thing, you're making the Minotaur hastened, which is fantastic for him because he's so movement based. But then he can move, and now he has essentially 3 out of 20 chance um, to be able to uh, get a critical, which is obviously a huge increase over just assuming you're going to get that 20 and doing an extra 5 damage on a crit is great. Obviously, it's a little bit of a conversion because you're really taking 3 damage, so there's been the argument that you're really only doing 13, which is it makes sense, but sometimes if you just need, that guy's just got a little too much health, that can just be enough to finish somebody off. And then, of course, pairing it with brutality again, of course, you get 20 damage on that puppy, and if you get that crit, it's even crazier, right? You're doing 30 damage in a primary. All right, and then his special attack, Labyrinthian Fury. Um, you got 25 damage, and which is a good strong hit, and then you may move the target 5 squares, which is that that's ton of movement. I mean, most of the time it's only 2, right? Um, but moving 5 is just it's massive. Nobody else moves characters, I think, that much. Obviously, it's a special, so. And then there is the downside that you lose all of your movement points not yet spent this turn. That's not horrible. Because you can basically get yourself move into a spot to make the attack and then attack, and it really doesn't change anything. So, not the end of the world on that one. And then the last ability, which is really probably one of the most awesome abilities he has, is so it's similar to Bull Charge, except it's trample, so you get to attack all of the enemies that you move through when you're making an 8 movement in a single direction, and you may strike the enemies through which you moved. So obviously you got to line them up a little bit to be able to make this. So there's a little handling challenge that can be with this, but you got to do 16 damage per hit, and then anybody that gets hit, you may move up to 2 squares each. So maybe you hit them and then you're throwing them into a lava square or something like that, which I know we've done in the past. But it's just crazy that obviously getting them all in a line can be pretty challenging. But even if you got 3 or 4 guys attacking 4 people with 16 damage each, I mean, that's really crazy. I mean, the only other hero that does something like that would be Averlum with like Shockwave. He gets to hit up to 2 people, but um, or even his like Arcane Blast, which won't even do that much damage. But it, and then being able to move them more, it's crazy. So that's easily a top tier ability, just because your number of targets is limited to the number of enemies you move through. So anyway, that's the Minotaur. He, obviously 3 of his 4 abilities are all movement related, and definitely fits with his mobility. He does a lot of damage, especially if he can make those hits. The handling, like I argued earlier, could probably be theoretically maybe moved a little bit lower because sometimes those movements can be challenging to get. The effects, I gave him a higher effects, which I don't know. I think it just had to do mostly with the additional movement and yeah, pretty much like the additional type of movement or damage that's applied is why they counted it higher for effects. And then defense, probably because of that drawback, I think is why they're saying that he's got a lower defense than some of the others. But that's the Minotaur. It's pretty awesome hero. Definitely one of my favorite out there. You got anything to say about him?
Um, I mean, I like him because he deals a lot of damage. He can move around and um trample. Like you said, if you can smack four of your, you know, 4 people at the same time doing 16 damage, it's insane,
Yeah, and if you hit at least the first one, you're going to be doing 20 damage on that guy,
right?
right? And then,
Mm-hmm.
so pretty much like just even hitting 2 guys, only 2, and you're hitting both of them, obviously. You're doing 36 damage, so that's a really strong hit. If you get a third one, all you need is 3, a minimum of 3 to make this ability ungodly strong, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you're turning that 36. You got another
16,
yeah, another 16 in there. So then you're down at was that
52.
52?
Yep.
52 damage. There's nobody else that does that much damage. So all you got to do is 3 people. All right, and then we got Count Blake, and Count Blake is probably my least favorite of all the brutes, but he's got his own utility and effects, which you'll see here in a second. I guess I haven't been reading all of the things on there. I've basically been talking through all of them, but so Count Blake is a mobile brute with powerful offensive abilities, but he deals less damage than others, ideal for breaking through enemy defenses and attacking distant opponents. I mean, most of the brutes can be pretty good about that, but it's sometimes they can get caught up on other enemies unless they're going to be taking a lot of reaction attacks, which wouldn't be good with low defense. So his defense is definitely lower than the other guy, or his offense is a little lower. His defense is slightly higher, and his mobility's maxed out, which we'll talk about. And then he's got basically the same effects as the Minotaur and Sedrik, and his handling is a little bit lower than the Minotaur, and I'm pretty sure I know the main reason why that is for this one. So Count Blake, life drain, so he ignores all effects applied by your enemies on the target. So that is really good for, let's say he's attacking like a tank who's used like protection, or let's say you got. So this is kind of interesting. So like him with, well, I guess Dragon Blood wouldn't be a good example because that's from other guys. But yeah, I mean, Protected is probably one of the first ones that come to mind for me, that you basically just negate that just by using this ability. So 11 damage, not super great. Um, the target can't regain HP for that turn, and Count Blake will regain 3 hit points, so he can help bring himself back up, which is good. Uh, Only one person, obviously. Moving on, we got Night Cloak. You may move up to 5 squares before declaring the target and do 12 damage, and then you're protected once per turn. So this is kind of similar to like the Morgr thing, where he's basically able to, move around additionally, which we talked about earlier, and being able to move 5, which is, really good. Obviously, he's not going to do as much damage, but he's good in the way that he can get in there and then protect himself, so he won't just get obliterated the first time he gets attacked. He's definitely the tankiest of all the brutes. So, yep, 12 damage, not that great. Movement is mostly about just getting into a good spot. And then we got Call of the Master, and this is really, in my opinion, the meat of this guy right here. So Call of the Master, you do 15 damage. It's a ranged attack, and you get a permanent ability. It says at the end of all your turns, you may move the target up to 2 squares, and then controlled by you, it makes a basic attack. Call of the Master ends if you die. So this one basically allows you to mind control enemies. Uh, so you may move the target up to 2 squares, and then controlled by you makes a base. So you get to make a movement too, and then do a basic attack. So this is really similar to Ellerin, who gets Mind Link, which is essentially the effect is exactly the same, except instead of it's a of an enemy, it's an ally. It's gonna do move 2 and then do a basic attack. So, but you get this at the end of all of your turns. So when it says all of your turns, it means at the end of, like, let's say you have 4 heroes you're playing with, it'd be at the end of all of them. You got to do this. So that's additional, potentially 8 damage or so. It depends on who you're mind controlling, but it's a pretty strong effect because it doesn't go away until you die. And then, of course, it's a ranged attack too, so you can be shooting somebody in the back lines with that, and they can just go around and start beating people up. Then we got Blood Feast, so that allows you to attack up to 2 enemies. You may move up to 4 squares before declaring the first target, and then 12 damage per hit. So you're going to do up to 24, 28 if you count the passive, and then you regain 12, so you get a lot of health back. You'll only be able to get that health that first time, I believe, though. So So it's a pretty good ability. I mean, it's not a ton of damage or anything, but it's a good way to get some health back. But it's not, I don't know, not crazy. So I'd probably conflict with their assessment that he is like more mobility than the Minotaur. Because if you look at the Minotaur, he's one less, but he has two abilities that give him movement versus the Minotaur had three abilities that give some kind of movement. I mean, I guess you could count three abilities if you count Call of the Master, but it's only two squares, so I really don't think it justifies a whole other mobility point than Morgr got, but whatever, that's them. So basically, getting more health and being able to protect himself and screwing with the enemy. It's some good stuff, but it's very tanky. It's more like supportive almost than it is really a damage guy, which is really one of the reasons that haven't ever been super crazy about taking Count Blake because he just doesn't seem to really fit quite as well into the Berserker class as the other guys, but I understand that they wanted to make them all unique and do something a little bit different. What do you think, Code?
To me, he seems like more of a controller than a brute. So I mean, he doesn't have. It's not like Elrain where she's like every turn
Yeah,
taking your opponent and they're doing something. But Call Master kind of relates to that and moving things around a little bit. He moves, so
yeah,
he's not a heavy hitter, but in the right team, he could be utility wise be very good.
yeah. So what's kind of funny about Call of the Master too is it says that the Call of the Master ends if you die, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I'm not sure, but I think this ability might exist even if so. Let's say you put it on somebody else and they die. Uh, I think it might still be on even if they get resurrected. I have to look into that, but it can be basically pretty strong to still be able to use that effect. I mean, just even the movement can put somebody out of place.
Right.
So anyway, talking with this is the brute class. All four currently all four brutes here. Um, all unique in their own way, but like I said, is Count Blake definitely doesn't fit really as well with the other three, in my opinion, as the other guys seem to kind of utilize, right? You got like your berserker guy, you got your guy who's doing basically consistent damage, and then your guy that's freaking just flying all over the battlefield, just attacking everything in his way. And then you got Count Blake who can move pretty decently, but he doesn't really do a ton of damage. And he's just kind of like healing himself, and I mean, just trying to sustain basically. So I guess one of the big things is that the effect that the target can't regain HP can be really good for PvP. Not quite as great for PvE because that doesn't always happen that often, at least currently. So yeah, what classes are brutes good with? So we'll talk about real quickly about some of the others. So obviously they don't fit super great with tacticians, and that's mostly because tacticians' passives is that they gain additional damage when they're adjacent to one of allies. So their passives conflict with each other. If you put a brute in there, he can't get his passive, but the tactician can. But if you go the other way, if the brute's by himself, then he can uh, get his attack, but the tactician can't. So this is one of these things where you have to know where you're moving your guys to, uh, and when you use these abilities, so like having a brute going first to do some damage, he'll get his passive, versus like the tactician, um, you know, if he goes, yeah, even I mean, you hit a target that is adjacent to at least one of your allies. So even if he goes second, then he's still not going to do great. So yeah, tacticians in general are not great combination with brutes. We got Death Knights. So enemy starts its turn adjacent to you, and the first target of the attack isn't you with you. This actually can be a pretty good one because if you get your tank into a good spot after the brute has attacked, the next turn, especially for PvE, if they decide to attack the brute, which oftentimes they will because these guys are, almost like glass cannons because they don't really
Mhm.
have any defensive abilities. And they have lower, or actually, I mean, they got pretty decent health. 65 is not too bad. Not as bad as shooters, which is why I'm always hesitant to really call them glass cannons because they're not really. But they do have 6 defense. But it can be pretty good because especially for PvE rules, they're going to attack the closest hero with the lowest health. So that's always going to be the brute, which means the tanks will always get that benefit. Obviously, it does not going to help the brute the next time, but at least initial positioning, it can be pretty good and maybe offset any damage that's going to the brute. Healers, definitely very good combination. Excellent combination. I mean, I talked earlier about how Jade, with her abilities to give critical strikes, also she has like Empower, which will really help brutes because they'll just give them even more damage. Which let's see, where did that sheet go? Oh, here it is. Yeah, Empower, right, is plus 3 damage on your attacks. So he's a great combination. I mean, I'm not going to go through all the healers, but they're really good because usually they're just very supportive, and they don't have to be in a great position, but they can still be helping the brutes out. And so basically, both of them can be triggering their passives without interrupting each other. And getting that healing and that support for brutes can be great because that's pretty much all they're missing, right? Is those defensive type abilities or the additional effects that'll they'll help them maximize their damage. Shooters are pretty good combination just because similar. They're not gonna conflict with their passives. Obviously, they're both damage, so brute's more likely to get attacked, but it's definitely not too bad. They're just not going to be quite as great as healers because shooters don't really provide that much support. They mostly just, similar to brutes, do just a lot of damage, but at range. And then controllers, they actually can be really good combination. Maybe, maybe not quite as good as healers, but still a great combination because they can provide things that help brutes do more damage, like making targets exposed or weakened, or cursed, or other things that basically are vulnerable. Doing these things will help brutes either take less damage when they are attacked, or uh, help the brutes do more damage. So they're pretty good, and then of course their passives don't conflict, which is another great thing, and they're just gonna help do some damage. So they're pretty good. I'd say one slightly step down, just because they do complement, but not like they help them do more damage or lessen a little bit of damage, but not quite the same level as a healer would. And then we got the bruisers, which I would say uh, it's not bad, but it's not very great either because their passives can conflict, where basically they have to be right in the action, but because they have to be attacked to be able to trigger their passive. So it's really not horrible, but obviously they have to be right in the action with brutes, which actually does happen pretty often with these guys. And then of course specials are kind of like their own thing. So really, if you're looking to make a good team, you know, tanks, um, healers especially, controllers are definitely those three classes I personally look to when trying to make a team with brutes because they could be a great combination, PvE, PvP. It just kind of depends on what exactly you're trying to do, but good options there. And basically, I think kind of what I mentioned a little bit earlier, the weaknesses of brutes is that they have lower defense. They have more health, which is good, but they are, little weakened because they don't get many defensive abilities. Really, their defense is being able to move around and just do so much damage that they beat down the opponent before the opponent really has a chance to try to do much damage to them. Which is actually the main reason why, like with Count Blake, right? Is like he's giving up some of that damage to heal himself, which doesn't really fit as well with, the archetype. All right. Well, any other thoughts or comments there, Code? I think we covered
We
that pretty good.
touch. Yeah, I think you covered all the good points, and you know, you just brutes with tanks are really good, and throw in a healer that makes them both broken. So, I mean, if you're healing the tank and the tank's protecting the brute, and then you're back to healing the brute, you're just,
Yeah.
especially in PvP, you're gonna make someone pull their hair out in some situations. But
Well,
you know,
yeah, and you get the brute that's in there, right? And the person that's
yeah,
like trying to go attack the healer, he's got to obviously get past the brute, which can be a little more challenging because, you got like the Minotaur or Katar that have some more movement. I mean, even Count Blake, right? That's going to be able to move more to get right back on top of them, so they can't really get away super easily either.
right. So, you can build a very great team starting with the brute if it's your main focus.
Yep. In my opinion, so I mean, I'll probably talk more about this in like other class spotlights, but to me, it feels like that the way that this game was like balanced and done is that there's all the classes are good. They're all good in different ways, but sometimes some of them can be a little bit more situational, but some of them are a little more like core.
Mm,
Because I often feel like a lot of the encounters require you to do a lot more damage. So, like the brutes, the shooters, um, for sure are like core classes in the way that if you're gonna need to do some good damage with somebody, and getting somebody from those two classes is essential. And then in terms of your support, area, getting a healer or a tank is really good. Um, and then a little more situational wise is the bruisers, the controllers, and the tacticians. So they're
right.
all good in their own ways, but like I said, it's kind of like if you don't have at least a brute or a shooter, your team might hurt a little bit, especially on damage. There is some ways to make that up, which I'll go more into in other classes, but you get like Vanris, for example. You get that guy on your team, even though he's a bruiser, he can easily replace a brute because he does so much damage and he does so much movement around that he can replace somebody like that. So, anyway, there are ways to mitigate it, but brutes are definitely very core class that are really good for just trying to do massive amounts of damage and just taking it right to them, getting in there and not letting them get away. So, all right. Well, anyway, that's pretty much the end of my stream. So, pretty short one today, about an hour and 10 minutes ish. And anyway, if you got any other questions on brutes or whatever, we can go about that in a future video, and I'll probably do another one of these maybe. I don't know. I mean, right now we're kind of in a period of slowdown, right? Because there's not a lot of new crazy news or things for us to try out. So I'm just kind of going over some of these, and we'll have a nice little collection of spotlight videos eventually. And so if anyone wants to watch these for in the future to get an idea of what there is, especially starting out back in January or February here when people get their game. All right. Well, anyway, thanks for getting on code, and we'll see you guys later.